wristwatch check. Inside joke. We'll chat about that after.
All right, folks, we are live.
We're gonna miss HQ. What's wrong with you, Art?
No HQ today. That's right, kids. Cumero numero uno. Here it comes. Welcome to HQ Live. This is it. All right. I guess this is the official beginning, and so it begins. The official start. Welcome everybody to Virtual Design Master 2018 special edition. This is the VDM Masterclass. It's a bit of a new take. We've decided to tackle something in a new way this year. For those folks who already know us, thanks, welcome back. My name is Eric Wright, otherwise known as @Disco Posse. I'm co-creator of Virtual Design Master, the series. We have with us as well our other co-creator, the ever-present and always purple, Angelo Luciani. Angelo, drop us an intro here. Tell us where we can find you online, and let's get rolling.
Right, all the good stuff. It's good to see everyone for another year of VDM. I don't have a cool Twitter handle like Eric or Melissa. Mine is just @Angelo Luciani. You find me on Twitter and virtuize.com.
Nice. And of course, we wouldn't be anywhere in this competition without a reason to compete. The mistress.
The very not evil. No, there's nothing evil about today. I want to put that out there. Maybe next week we'll get a little evil. But my Twitter, I'm Melissa, and my Twitter handle is Venus33.
And big shout out, I love Ken Alboni says, yeah, simple Twitter handles are the best. There we go. For folks that are watching live, of course, we're coming at you from two different angles. We're streaming live directly to YouTube. So if you're already on virtualdesignmaster.com/live, you're watching the live session now. We're also directly to folks that are joining the webinar. And with that, not only do we have our folks that have started Virtual Design Master here, we're many seasons into this point. It's incredible to think of how far we've come. And we couldn't have done that without great supporters and great folks. First off, I'd like to welcome Renee Vanden Bedham, who's been a longtime supporter of the community in general, of all sides of technology, and been a great, powerful supporter of Virtual Design Master. Renee, introduce yourself. Tell us where we can find you online.
Renee Vanden Bedham. I'm at Round Tower Technologies at VCDX133. Very simple Twitter handle. The same with blogging, VCDX133.com.
And not only do we have good judges and good contributors, but we actually have former participant and winner of Virtual Design Master from our latest edition in 2017. Katerina, you probably feel a little less pressure being on camera this time around, but if you want to introduce yourself, tell us where we can find you online, and maybe tell us quickly about what it feels like to be a Virtual Design Master.
Well, thank you for having me back, first of all. I'm glad to be back. You can find me on Twitter on _Katkav_, which is a bit more complicated. And yeah, it's great to be here. I love this competition. I'm very happy I had the chance to participate and get to know the community, and I'm always happy to support everybody else. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much. So again, we think about what we want to do with Virtual Design Master. It's been a real goal for us to build a community, to think about how we do literally the first and longest running IT reality competition in history. So it's pretty special to be a part of that. Now, we maybe don't have 8 million people or however many that HQ is stealing from us at the moment. But what we do have is a great set of folks who are going to be with us as a panel today. And I'm going to kick that right over to Melissa. We're going to tell us about what we're doing this year. We want to think about what's different and why is 2018 such a cool year for us.
So I've noticed that I've been seeing lots of ads on the interwebs for masterclasses, right? Everybody has a masterclass. Gordon Ramsay has one. Astronauts have masterclasses. So the big trend right now is everybody wants to learn from the experts, right? So I thought it would be really cool if we did kind of a spin on that for Virtual Design Master. So kind of a master class where we have two design experts here who can kind of answer whatever questions we have for them that I've created. And unfortunately, there are no zombies this year, maybe next episode. And just kind of see, them answer them, to discuss it with each other, go through their thought process, that kind of thing. So really just kind of learning from the experts this year. And so,
yeah, do you want to? We do want to give a big shout out as well, and I apologize. I should have been ready for this one early on. Virtual Design Master has been around for now 5 years, and we've been very proud of the supporters of all of our sponsors. I would encourage you, of course, keep up. We're going to be doing lots of site updates, so go to virtualdesignmaster.io, and you're going to see a list of our previous participants, all of our sponsors, and with that, I think we're going to get right to the goodness, Melissa.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right. So we have a couple questions, and I'm just going to read the question and kind of let Kat and Renee jive with it, and we'll see how things go. And maybe there's a little bit of a zombie in there someplace, just like a little tiny zombie. Okay. Question 1. It's about an infrastructure refresh project. It's something as IT architects we encounter a lot, right? So a customer tells you they want to continue to use their existing server hardware vendor, but cost is one of their top concerns with this infrastructure refresh project. You have reviewed their current purchasing agreement and discover they could save a great deal of money by switching server vendors. How do you handle this from a design perspective?
I suppose I'll go first. So this is a common problem that I see just with customers. They have infrastructure that's really old, and they think that because the ROI is completed, that keeping that infrastructure for their next generation of design will be something that makes sense. Obviously, from an operational perspective, so people, process, and technology, supporting old infrastructure is incredibly expensive. So that's one. The other thing with switching server vendors or going with a more modern platform is hyperconvergence. So there, it's really a total cost of ownership conversation. So it's not necessarily CapEx, and that's where there's quite a shift in thinking that a customer would have to understand when you're going with a new hyperconverged stack, because obviously from a people perspective, you're going to have the concept of the full stack engineer. I'm using air quotes deliberately there. And it's a whole new way of operating. Those are my initial thoughts anyway. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you. So I've seen this a lot from both operational and architecture point of view, and mainly because I've had many customers who have been using a specific vendor for many, many years. And just the conversation about switching to somebody else is very difficult. From operational perspective, surprisingly, I've seen that people are not very willing to switch to a different vendor because they think they would not be able to support it. Whereas in reality, really supporting hardware is basically very similar across the whole stack. So it's a very common problem. It's a difficult conversation. The other aspect customers often have is that they have long-going partnerships with specific vendors. That's a reason they don't want to switch to anybody else. So it's always a long conversation that needs to be had.
Do you find it difficult to try to convince a C-level executive, right, beyond the operational stuff, because they're not really concerned with that, right, that there is a benefit from changing platforms to another hardware vendor, or even adopting a platform like HCI? How does that conversation usually go?
With C-levels, it's about business architecture. So there it's about what's the business value. So you're right, it's not a technical conversation at all. 5 to 7 year TCO is what you need. How it's going to impact their organization structure from an IT perspective. And really what it's about is, particularly for hyperconvergence, it's a conversation about, okay, you're not so much worried about keeping the lights on, because hyperconvergence gives you the ability to do that automatically through automation, hopefully, if it's done correctly. Then it gives your people time to focus on new projects, delivering business value as a company.
Yeah, just from my side, I completely agree with that. I think it's often about the mindset that has to be changed, and just to explain the situation.
It's the people aspect, right? Sometimes that can be more difficult than any of the technology involved. It's the people around it.
That's the hardest part, and politics.
That's even worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So moving right along, and here's my little zombies, and I'm sure you're going to understand what I'm getting at with this. As part of that infrastructure refresh project, or maybe a different one, you have to continue to use an customer's existing data center. Makes sense. Lots of customers want you to use what they already have. However, this data center is next to a known zombie breeding ground. How do you handle this from a design perspective?
So Kat can go first this time if she wants.
Yeah, I can go first because it brings me back and memories are coming back of our challenges. So I remember when I was doing my designs, first of all, I placed it in Slovakia because I said nobody knows where that is, so zombies would not find it. That's not relevant for this question, but I remember I was doing physical security, so making sure the zombies won't be able to enter our premises, and just making sure that they won't get anywhere near our data center and our hardware. So.
I can really bring it back if I start asking NSX questions, but
do
maybe,
it.
Yeah, but maybe I won't because I don't have any prepped. That's why.
Yeah, so for me, the data center with the zombies. So you can change the word zombie for any other kind of man-made disaster or natural disaster. And from a design perspective, two things come to mind to me. So number one is the data center facility itself. One way to mitigate that I've done in the past with an aversion to different types of disasters is to have the infrastructure stack installed in a pod, a performance optimized data center. It's a shipping container, data center in a shipping container. So you can pull it out, stick it on the back of the truck and move it wherever you need to. And obviously the other big thing is data protection and also business continuity and disaster recovery. So you have a high risk site. So that means that you are going to have some sort of data protection within the site and also replication to a remote site, whether that's async or near sync or synchronous replication, depending upon the RPO. That's another way to mitigate that type of risk.
So I'm going to throw something out there, a question that I didn't give you guys beforehand since we're kind of going down this path of risk. I've had instances where I walk into a customer and, they can't tell me RPO, RTO, nothing. They've never done a BIA, right? Because maybe they've never actually had a disaster before. So how do you work with that kind of customer who hasn't done a BIA? What are the key things you're going to try to instill in them to work with them to get through that process and determine what their needs actually are? So the way I handle this, and this happens very, very often, is you just start with a basic RPO, and that is an 8-hour or a 24-hour RPO. So at least you've got some replicated consistency at least once a day. And then from there, you can start improving it once you just start discovering more requirements. And the other way to handle it is to say, okay, we're going to have bronze, silver, and golden applications, and then just have a conversation about what is critical and what is not. And very quickly, you come up with a ranking of one or two apps that are the most important. They'll be gold, and then the rest will either be silver and bronze. And bronze typically is best effort, no replication whatsoever. You would just restore it from the local backup as quick with the best effort policy. Kat, do you have anything to add to the wonderful process known as a business impact analysis?
So from my experience, for example, when I had a customer that was planning their first BCRS and disaster recovery tests, what we did was really trying to understand what the application is, how it works. So we would basically go through the list of applications they had and made sure we understood which servers are critical, which servers are not. And based on that, we came up with that kind of ranking that Renee was mentioning. And we went from there.
Yeah, it's one of those tricky things. Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
And one other interesting, sorry, go on.
No, go on, sorry.
Yeah. So one other interesting thing there that Kat just mentioned is that a lot of companies, they don't really understand their application stack. So they'll have what they call the business critical app, and let's say it's a vertically scaled legacy 3-tier app, and they're protecting that, but they're not protecting all the surrounding services like a middleware, so an enterprise service bus, which you must have for that app to function. So they're not protecting the whole thing. So it's kind of, I suppose you could call it fake disaster recovery, because you don't have all of the dependent applications as well, and databases and whatnot, and enterprise services. So it's very important to capture the whole thing.
Melissa, got a question here from one of the viewers, D, who asks, and I'll just throw it up for the panelists, regarding things like data center in a box, shipping container. How do you avoid building the technical equivalent of a McMansion? Obviously, some potential solutions are overkill for certain customers. Just want to throw it out for the panel.
So D, I'm assuming when you say McMansion, you're talking about something that's super expensive. With pods, obviously you can buy pods that are in different sizes, like from a 20-foot container to a 40-foot container to a small 10-foot container. They're certainly available. I think the trick is to purchase the type of container that fits your infrastructure stack. Container solutions I typically see for remote sites like a military application or a first responder application. And then for enterprise, it's typically data centers that you're building that are at the enterprise level, but are maybe 4 or 5 racks that you can contain the data center in. And obviously hyperconvergence is the perfect fit for the pod architecture, because you can actually stack so much infrastructure into a single pod. And then there is basically top of rack switching, so you need some sort of leaf spine network. And also the pods are designed to handle, they're built on with a modern cooling mechanism, so you can get up to 30 kilowatts per rack. So those are kind of the decision points that go through my mind. One thing that is definitely not a good fit for pod architectures from a data center facility perspective would be legacy 3-tier infrastructure. It's just too big, too cumbersome, too heavy. You definitely want to go with a hyperconverged footprint, in my opinion anyway.
Just one question I want to ask you on that one, Renee. When we talk about risk as being a part of the assessment of the value of this total solution, when you have different hardware in your recovery site relative to your production site, how do you weigh that as a risk versus the win of that you can probably be scaled down, more portable? Like, where do you weigh the requirements versus the risk in that case?
So what you're saying is that at one site you've got, let's say, a modern infrastructure stack, and the other side it's legacy. So the two are not necessarily compatible. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's and operationally, you're managing potentially different infrastructure in your recovery site, and how often you revisit that.
Yeah. So ideally, if you're going through an infrastructure refresh, you want to be able to hit both sites at the same time. Obviously, with budget being a constraint, sometimes that's not possible. If you're relying on a native replication technology with your legacy stack, it means you're going to be switching over to a new replication technology, whatever that will be. So, for example, you're invested in VNX or VMAX. So with VMAX, you're using SRDF, and at your new site, you've switched, let's say, to a Nutanix platform, which has native Nutanix replication technology. Obviously, that's a mismatch. You're going to have to come up with some third-party solution to make that happen. That's an operational nightmare, to be honest. To me, it's much better to design the solution accordingly so that you actually hit both sites at the same time and you treat them as both greenfield sites and you do a migration across rather than a greenfield and a brownfield. That's a bit of a nightmare. It means that you're not taking your business continuity and disaster recovery seriously. If you're going down that route, it's kind of an afterthought. The other way would be to drop the DR site completely and maybe go with a public cloud solution. You can do like a pilot light, replicate to a cloud instance.
Excellent. Kat, I know you've got, I jumped in, I had a bonus question there. If you want to cover your thoughts on the overall question and also the risk question, if you don't mind.
Sorry, which one? Could you please repeat the question?
The one in the, can you see the one in the chat panel for D about the data centers in a box / shipping containers?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And I know, as you're reading it, Kat, I know you worked on a cruise ship. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
And I kind of think of that as well. You know, you can kind of think of that as a shipping container, so to speak. I mean, you know, probably a bad example now after saying it, but yeah, I mean, you know, I guess there's some different criteria there.
Absolutely. So what was important there, we had to basically pack everything, ship it across to Bulgaria, and then crane it over onto the ship, and then build it again. So what was very important was keeping the stack as small as possible. We could not obviously move the complete data center. So that was a very, very important consideration.
Yeah. I have a question just to follow up on this. Sometimes architects are challenged with, I have a DR, I have a production site, I have a DR site. Do I make them both live and just, you know, have I don't really care where I'm getting my data from, because I know I'm using both sites, and if one goes down, I know that it's all there. Or do I actually do like a live site and a dark site, and that site gets turned up when the production one is down? Do you folks hear that a lot, or is that like a consideration from customers and people that you deal with, or is that kind of like legacy thinking from the past?
Depends where they're at in their disaster recovery journey.
Okay.
If this is your first foray into disaster recovery, so typically it's either main data center disaster recovery site, so basically an active site and a cold site. Active passive or active active are kind of the three, you know, big families for disaster recovery. And then whether there is a disaster recovery automation engine running on top of it, and also the distance of the data centers from each other. That will define where you actually go. Because, for example, if you want to run active-active, particularly if you're running legacy 3-tier apps, a lot of apps are actually latency sensitive, which means that the web application and database actually need to run together on the same site. You can't actually run them cross-site. So it depends where they're at. If you're just getting started, just go with basic disaster recovery. So a hot site and a cold site with storage replication and some type of either manual procedures or an automation engine to bring them up. And then from there, you can go all the way up to active-active or active-passive. Active-passive is quite possible with data centers that are quite far apart. And then also it comes down to the RPOs and the RTOs that you're trying to achieve. If it's a mission critical app or a business critical app that's 5 nines or more of availability, then disaster recovery automation is definitely going to be a part of it. And you could be looking at an active-active architecture. It depends.
The favorite thing ever in IT, right? It depends.
Yeah.
It really does. So it's kind of similar along that vein. My next question is, what are, I guess, I already said one, but let's go with what are some of the most dangerous assumptions that people can make during the design process? I know when I was starting to get more into design, it was something I almost struggled with is, well, what is an assumption, and can we really assume certain things, or does that lead to potential risk down the road? So I'm curious as to what you guys view as some of the most dangerous things you see out there as assumptions.
Kat, do you want to go first? I've been talking a bit too much.
That's fine. From my perspective, every assumption is dangerous because I've been in a situation where assumptions actually led to bad situations. Coming back to a project I was on, that in the boxes we had with hardware, we will have correct power plugs. and that wasn't, and power cables. We got to Bulgaria, and then we found out that we do have cables, but they do not fit. We do have different plugs on the ship and so on, and had to basically find an electrician who would be able to redo the cables for us on the spot. So that was an assumption that we made, and it led to really serious, would lead to very serious consequences if we weren't able to solve it. So in my mind, all the assumptions are dangerous, and we should always try to get everything discussed as much as we can to get the answers we are looking for.
So for me, I do a lot of VCDX reviews and MPX reviews. Probably the most dangerous that I see is someone who has no assumptions whatsoever. Like they haven't captured anything, right? That's probably the most dangerous. Then you'll have people that have too many assumptions without any type of risk mitigation. Because let's face it, when you're going through a design, you've got pros and cons to every design decision. Every design decision has risks. The trick is to make sure that the risks that are listed, that you've mitigated them, and you're making sure that they don't actually detract or impact the business value or the business problem that you're trying to solve. So it all kind of goes hand in hand. Risks and assumptions are a part of the business. The trick there is you just need to understand what they are and have a mitigation strategy. And that's kind of my long-winded way of re-repeating what Kat was saying earlier, I suppose.
Yeah, just to further on that, and doing disaster recovery and business continuity especially, did that for a few years in a large financial company. And one of the things we did is we had to put in the human aspect. We said the assumption was that you would have everybody there, and all these plans were designed around that our same primary support folks were going to be available in the alternate site, and that we would have, we've got 40 people on staff here, we'll have 35 available because they can get to that secondary site. And we actually had to build in that is a bold assumption, because assume that if there's been a significant business disruption in the region, we have to assume that also we don't have 100% availability for staff. It could be during vacation. That was like one of the most terrifying assumptions that people had early. And we said, there's a morale thing of what is the mood going to be of people if we did have a large scale outage, if it was, depending on the nature of the outage. So it's interesting that we living through that, we had to think it wasn't just the technology, but also the people aspect of availability and what it would be like. So it's like you said, Renee, I like this idea of, assumptions. If you have no assumptions, that means you just haven't found them. And if you have too many, then maybe you're digging a bit too deep. And Kat, I can tell you, I've lived through the plug problem from sites, and it's painful and far too real. We've all been bitten by something like that.
And Eric, what you're saying is actually probably, if I was to pin down an actual response, probably the people risks or the people assumptions are the ones that are the most dangerous, because you can be bringing in a completely new technology stack that may be great for one customer, but it's not necessarily the right choice for every customer, right? Because particularly with the software-defined data center, you need the right company or the right customer to have that, right? They need to be ready for change. And if they're very siloed, very legacy 3-tier, then what you're delivering them will probably be a failure. It's basically a boat anchor. It's not going to be something that helps them to advance themselves.
Right. We have two questions from viewers, one from Donnie, and I'll throw this out there. What is the panel's opinion on stretched L2 VLANs in terms of disaster recovery? What are some of the use cases you've seen that require L2, and what are some safe ways to stretch L2 that you've seen or deployed?
So traditionally you would use OTVs. So when you're doing stretched L2, typically the driver there is from a disaster recovery automation perspective. You don't want to do the in-guest customization when you switch over to re-IP the infrastructure when you're switching from site to site. So there you can do dark fiber and have that as a stretched layer 2 infrastructure across two geographic sites. The other way is to use an overlay like OTV or VXLAN or Geneve. I have to say that the nicer way of doing it that I've seen so far would be VMware's implementation with SRM. Veeam do a good job of it as well, but in particular, I like how with NSX you can use Geneve or VXLAN in association with SRM or Zerto or Veeam to do switchover and failback. Obviously, that's typically for virtual machine infrastructure, not really for physical, because they typically only support virtual machine workloads. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Kat, any thoughts on that?
What Renee said, I agree.
Sorry?
What Renee said.
Especially the part about NSX, right, Kat?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no problem. These, again, these are always the tough, these questions out of left field are always the tough ones. So kudos to the panel here being able to answer them. I have another one from D, and he's asking, would you recommend using an assumption log to capture the analysis and reasons that led to the recorded assumption in the design?
Yes. So in VCDX world, you have what's called the assumption section. So there you're listing all of the assumptions. Then that goes hand in hand with the risk analysis section, which would be what I would think is another name for the assumption log that Dee mentioned. And that there really takes every single risk, including the assumptions in the design, explains it, comes up with the different design alternatives that you could consider, as well as from a risk perspective, how critical it is, how you mitigate it, and what the possible cost could be to the risk, if you can put a figure on it. And then you would go with the cheapest risk or the most operationally simple.
Great.
I think that something people sometimes try to use in VCDX land that does not fly is, well, the customer accepted the risk, so I didn't have to worry about it, right? Yeah. But the fact is, it's up to you as the architect to provide those mitigation possibilities, right? Maybe the customer does, in fact, decide to accept that risk, and they sign off the big red letter saying, we accept, but it's still part of your duty to provide possible mitigation for that, even if the outcome is ultimately they accepted it.
Yeah, for sure. I concur. Definitely. As an enterprise architect, you're the one that's responsible for holding the customer's hand through the dark woods, even though the customer may not understand how dangerous it is. You're the one there who's responsible for mitigating those things and providing protection.
All I would add is that all the information you can record from the meetings and conversations you had is a good thing, because you can always go back to that and find the reasons why certain decisions were made.
Exactly. All right, so here is a really interesting one. I think that will tie into something that many, even budding architects or systems engineers encounter. You have had a 2-hour kickoff meeting with a customer who would like to see some sort of design documentation before you proceed any further. You don't have the opportunity to ask questions or get any further clarification for what was discussed. If you do not provide some sort of deliverable, you will not be selected for the project. What do you include in this initial deliverable?
Yeah, so I've evolved from the first VCDX I did, where I had very detailed documentation all the way through to, okay, I work for a partner and we're delivering designs all the time. So obviously every design that I do is not going to be at the VCDX level or the NPX level. So what I do now is I have a series of broadsheets. So this is Visio diagrams with multiple pages. So the conceptual model and logical design on the first page. Then from there, I go into the management and control plane. compute, network, storage, data protection, and business continuity disaster recovery. And the last slide is data center facility. So I just have some very basic diagrams in there. So it's basically a template that I reuse all the time. And what I'll do is with that initial customer deliverable, I'll go through and flesh out, okay, what are the requirements, one or two, create some logical design decisions, and then that is the flavor that I take all the way through the other pages. And it's just a very quick deliverable that looks professional, yet follows the VCDX style of architecture or the way of doing things. And then that there is basically the initial discussion point moving forward. And depending upon what consulting is required, we either go a lot deeper or we keep it quite shallow just to make sure that all the requirements are being met.
I would just add to it from my side. Yes, I would also start with the very high level design, starting with the conceptual and understanding what we are trying to achieve, what are the main business goals or requirements, and a very high level overview created during the session with the customer as the first deliverable, and then going from there.
Exactly. Yeah, this is something when I was an SE, I encountered. I can't even tell you how many RFPs I responded to. It would just seem like they'd come in waves. Like it'd be no RFPs and 5 are due at the same time. And you know, an RFP is sometimes different. Sometimes you don't even have that initial customer meeting, right? All you get is a document saying, here's what we want. Maybe you can ask questions, maybe you can't. So really what Renee said, kind of having that library of here's what I can build on, here's the things I want to make sure I deliver to every customer as a baseline, and then we'll get into it in the process. I think I had a really light one I used to do. It was like kind of like a solution overview, right? So kind of like a quick conceptual logical thing, you know, what requirements I was able to suss out from the material, and then any assumptions I had to make, right? I was working at NetApp, so I was doing a lot of storage stuff. So if I had to make some sort of assumption for sizing a storage array or something, I would clearly mark it, or I would tell them this array is capable of, you know, this many IOPS with this much latency, with this kind of IO profile, block size, all that kind of stuff. And then as a vendor, I would kind of go a little further sometimes. And if there was hardware included, I would give them a little blurb on the hardware. Not really the architecture, but kind of the important things for them to know about it. And then go into a little bit about like data center, power requirements, rack space, how much space is going to take up, all that kind of stuff. So I love this question. I love your answers just because it's such an important thing for so many people who are starting out as SEs or SAs to kind of get their heads around. And once you develop your way of doing it from getting feedback from people like Renee and Kat, that really helps you kind of go through it every time and make your designs better and help you evolve. So thank you so much, guys, for answering that. I thought that was really good answers.
I just want to drop in one thing too, that for folks that want to get started, one of the big things is what's a good example document, and Kat, Renee, I'll ask you as well, but I'll point folks that Virtual Design Master, we've been working through enterprise architecture and design styles. You'll see a variety of different options. We actually store all of the code. If you go to the website, you can get to the GitHub repository. So if you go to github.com/virtual design master, I believe it's VDM or VDM challenge 1, 2. Sorry, I should have that in hand. But anyways, you go to the website, it'll point you to our GitHub repository, and all of our previous designs, including the winning designs, are there. So it's a good chance to look through other architects who've created their own style guides, and you'll see some common stuff. Kat, then Renee, where would you go if you wanted to learn how to do your first design doc and like build on those templates?
I would go to Renee's side.
Another good area is TOGAF. TOGAF has some good stuff, particularly around business architecture and getting into technology architecture as well and linking those together.
Yeah. So we have three questions, different topics. Here's an interesting one from Val. As an IT architect, have you ever had a situation where your client requests that you go with a full open source solution? And in your view, is it possible to design a full open source enterprise solution today?
Kat, do you want to go first?
It will be very quick. I haven't, to be honest. I did have customers who wanted to go with certain open source products, but it never went through fully. So I don't really have experience with building a full open source design.
Right.
So for me personally, very little open source solutions or open source components in what I design. Typically, it'll be a particular flavor of Linux. Back in the day when OpenStack was all the rage, I thought maybe if OpenStack kicked off, then we would be doing full OpenStack solutions. But to be honest, I'm not seeing OpenStack in the wild at all, particularly homegrown, build it yourself. Maybe sometimes we'll have customers that use OpenStack at the enterprise level, like global companies, and they have their own OpenStack teams, and they may consume it as an OpenStack as a service, like from Platform 9 or whatever. What else was I going to say there about open source? So where I am seeing some full open source solutions is, so Roundtail, we've got a DevOps practice. So they've built an offering using all open source DevOps tooling that we've built into a platform that we support. But that's quite rare, the fact that type of offering, in my opinion, at least.
Okay. Another question from Tim.
So just before you go on, Angelo, Eric is our OpenStack guru. Eric, you got to talk about it at least.
I was going to say I'm going to pour one out for all my OpenStack friends who apparently it is a challenge. I think like what Val talked about being a full stack OpenStack or open source platform offering is tough. Like you said, Renee, I think we love to see the sprinkling in of open options. It's a risk to be very aware of, depending on, like you said, there a people side to support operating an open source environment. If it's not your production environment, then I highly doubt that open source as your full stack recovery solution or as an architecture is the right way to go out of the gate. You could justify it, you could work through it. But yeah, definitely an interesting risk to bring into a design. I'm a big fan of open source solutions. However, I'm also very aware that there's nothing wrong with a great enterprise solution that may use open source content as well. So I like to mix and match. Like I said, aim for what's the customer requirement. Does it solve the business requirements? Does it meet the technical needs? Use open where possible, because I do love open communities and supporting open source software. But I'm also an optimistic capitalist. Sometimes the true vendor supported solution is going to be a better one, just because you've got the backing of a big engineering team to ride it.
Great, thanks, Eric. Question from Tim. How have you educated a customer that has been misinformed by FUD or believes something works one way when it doesn't, especially when they are 100% confident they are correct and wants the design to reflect the misinformation? Kat,
yeah, that's a very common thing and very hard, depending on the customer, of course. But I've seen this many times. Customers either have certain perceptions of products. They may think something is working in a way it's not. And it's very hard to explain that basically what they think is correct is not. All we can do is try to educate them, try to explain how the technologies work, how it works for them, how it works in their environment, what they think they would achieve, if it's possible or if it's not, and just go through it. But yeah, I've seen this a lot, and it's very, very common and very, very hard task to do.
Yeah, this one's interesting. It depends upon who is the person in front of the customer. If it's the competition, then it just turns into a FUD competition, right? There's really no trust from the vendor. With like what we do at Round Tower, so we're vendor agnostic. We really don't have a dog in the fight at all. We care about the customer's value, what we're delivering to the customer, that their business goals are being met. So for me, the way I tackle this is I just break down the pros and cons of of each solution and then explain why, or explain the pros and the cons of whatever's on the table. And that typically puts it to rest. But it helps that we're vendor agnostic. Whereas if I was working for the competing vendor, it's a very hard conversation.
Okay. And finally, a question from Ken. How do you approach designing a solution when a customer has specifically asked you to incorporate a product you are not deeply familiar with?
You go on and have your little VDM and learn as much as you can overnight. Because that's a very, very common thing, at least from my perspective. Obviously, we do not have knowledge about everything that's out there. So if there's anything new, it's always a nice way to learn new things, which is a bit stressful and needs to be done very quickly, but it's a good way to learn new things as well.
Yeah, so what I do is, as an enterprise architect, it's like Kat said, you can't be the expert on everything, but you can have a functional understanding of every silo in the data center. So this is where the logical design comes in. The logical design is where you capture the functions that you need for that particular technology area, and then you take those logical design decisions and start attaching those to the physical design. And in this case, where you have a technology silo that you're not familiar with, you're doing a lot of Googling, so a lot of Google foo, and then you're also reaching out within the community to an SME, a subject matter expert, who is the guru or thought leader in that area, and you lean on them. So a lot of Googling and reaching out to the community or within your company, of course.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that. It's important to understand how you consume knowledge and know best, right? To know yourself. So maybe you're really good at watching YouTube videos, or maybe you like reading blogs, or maybe you like putting in the lab. Kind of understanding how you absorb knowledge best is really good for these kinds of situations as well.
Yeah, and the best thing there is phone a friend. This is why we have vCommunity. You just reach out to one of your Twitter buddies and phone a friend. It's the quickest and easiest way to do it. I do it all the time.
All right, we have I'm sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Yes, you also have to, the interesting challenge of there's always going to be weigh the bias of preference in anything when you ask to folks. You're like, the thing I find the toughest about being in open communities is that we talk about a lot of different solutions, and someone will say like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem using, I can't get this Puppet thing working. And the answer to that most likely on Twitter is going to be, why aren't you using Ansible? Or why aren't you we're in an interesting spot because we work with so many folks who work with so many technologies that preference will take some folks down the road. And that's why I love the phone a friend idea. I also sort of tell people, be careful, because your friends may tell you to choose a different solution, and you always go back to that core of, did it meet the requirements? And hey, this is going to be a bit tougher, but it may be the right solution to just dig deep and do extra learning to make sure you're actually hitting the mark on that particular technology.
Eric, good info. I was wondering if you wanted to take the last question as we kind of wind down.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. God, I tell you, an hour goes by quickly. We're 3/4 of the way through. This is one of the things that we love is when we go through this interactivity. Thank you to all the audience who've been watching live, both directly through the webinar as well as on YouTube. Just a preview too. This is the first of. We've got another session that's going to be coming up. So next Thursday, we're going to put the next sign up today. So go to virtualdesignmaster.io. You'll be able to sign up for the next webinar. We'll keep things on social. Of course, follow us on #virtualdesignmaster. We'll make sure we can run things through. But it wouldn't be a virtual design master without the gotcha question. And I can tell you, this is the gotcha question that we see on every single design. And it's a great one. Personally, I love. and it's my one that every VCDX has heard. How do you size for unknown workloads? And I think both of you have received this both through VDM or through otherwise. Kat, I think this may have been one of the ones that came up in some of your designs too, but when someone asked that horrifying question, how do you answer?
Absolutely. So this did come up when the VDM designs. And so how I would approach it during VDM was that usually we had some sort of an information of what kind of application we are running. So basing it on that, you could possibly think about what sort of application is it? Is it a freighter app? Will I need some web servers for it? These will usually have, let's say smaller configuration. Do I need some application servers? Is there a lot of processing going on in the background for the application? Are there any large databases? And so I would basically make it up based on the few bits of information we had for the application, and then based on my experience from my previous life, I would just base it on that, started off with some average configurations, scaled it up based on what we were given, and I went from there. So in my designs, I did actually do these calculations. I have included Excel sheets with how I approached it. So that was my approach during the competition.
Yeah, for me, a similar train of thought. So typically it depends upon the enterprise that I'm dealing with. So are they an SMB? Are they commercial? Are they true enterprise, global enterprise, or a service provider? Because those are completely different kettles of fish. Typically for an SMB, they'll maybe have 10 to 20 virtual machines. And maybe 10 terabytes of data. Commercial is in the hundreds of VMs and maybe up to 80 terabytes of data. Large enterprise could be up to 1,000, 2,000 VMs. And then onto service provider, which are in the tens of thousands. Also, the industry that they're in also lends itself to the types of applications that they're going to be running. So, for example, if you're dealing with a company that is in the medical or financial field, you've got to worry about HIPAA and PCI compliance. And also there are typically larger workloads there, very large databases as well that are typically very transactional. And then from there, you've got certain industries that have the concept of the monster virtual machine or the high performance database. And then from there, that will typically be maybe 10 or 15% of the workloads that are considered high performance computing. And then there you need to worry about NUMA memory boundaries and NUMA limits, et cetera, and also latency sensitive apps, right, which require a different type of design, and also laying out the virtual machine hardware in a particular way, right, to optimize database traffic and whatnot. So there, what I typically do is those industries and the size of the customer is what basically defines the type of template that I'm using and the assumptions that I have. And that also includes the virtual CPU into the physical core ratios as well, and whether memory reservations are needed or I'm doing memory over subscription as well, memory sharing and whatnot.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's, if you think of how many times we've bumped into the question through our series in Virtual Design Master and folks that are VCDX recipients and candidates, it's a hot button question. I want to give a shout out as well for folks that, again, we've talked about Virtual Design Master, we've talked about things, the reason why we ask these questions, to our very own creative director, Melissa, who most recently authored a book called The IT Architect's Journey. You can, of course, you can take a look at itarchitectjourney.com. You can get both the ebook or physical book, and that's a great thing. Melissa, you want to take a second, talk about what is the book? Why? I
wasn't expecting that. Thank you. For
there's a nice little. We got to
you
make
were
sure
one
we
of the
highlight
first people to read it, right?
I got an early preview. I got lucky.
So I knew for a very long time that I wanted to work towards becoming an IT architect in a VCDX. And once I realized that, it was kind of hard to figure out, well, what do I do next? What are the things I need to learn? How should I go about learning them? So I decided after my PhDX journey to kind of put that all in a book. So it's about the different areas that you should learn, how to learn them from a technological aspect, as well as, you know, the softer side, like gathering requirements, working with assumptions, working on your writing skills, all that kind of good stuff. So definitely a good read for anybody who's interested in becoming an IT architects or interfacing with them.
So I think we're rounding up to the close of this first session for Virtual Design Master Masterclass. This has been very helpful. You know, everything that we do with our Virtual Design Master team, I find to be personally helpful. I want to give a huge shout out, of course, to all our previous participants, judges, supporters, sponsors, and of course to my cohorts on the team here, Angelo and Melissa, Renee and Kat. We've watched both of your journeys through Virtual Design Master, through the community. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this. Again, for folks that are here today and they want to catch up with a little bit more of this, we will be back next Thursday at the same time. Same bat time, same bat channel, as they say. We will be online again. Melissa, do you want to give us a sneak peek on what we may hear about next Thursday?
Not really, but I guess I could. If you're undertaking the VCDX or IT architect journey, there's certain qualities of an infrastructure you're worried about. So we're going to dive into those a little deeper.
And in the meantime, I want to talk about, we have one event. If you're watching us live, of course, it's good to know that we will be having different folks that are going to be at VMworld and at some upcoming events. So VMworld being the closest in the vExpert community. I know I will be there, definitely looking to connect with folks who are on the ground in Las Vegas. Renee, I believe you're there as well. Kat, I know it's a long trip for you. That'd be that's a whole lot of boating and you know, even less flying, but still it's a long travel. Are you going to be at VMworld either Europe or US this year?
I will be at both.
Oh wow, okay, so you're coming all over the place.
And she's presenting.
I'm also presenting at both, so please come and see my session.
There we go. Well, congratulations. We'll make sure we share. We'll get email. We'll get information going so we can share it with the community. We'll get it up on Twitter. So it's really cool to see. So congratulations on getting sessions accepted there. That's great. Angelo, are you on the ground this year?
Yes, I'll be at VMworld as well. And I've always wanted to do this on YouTube, and I talked about this earlier. So just give me 1 second to do this. Hit the subscribe button wherever it is. Smash that like button and hit that little bell to get reminders of anytime we're live online. So thanks. I feel like the real YouTubers, they do it with a little more enthusiasm, but I tried. So
we're getting good practice. We're going to work our way up to become YouTube stars one day. So Melissa, anything else to add for today's show?
No, thank you guys, everybody. Thank you to Kat and Renee for fielding our questions. Thank you to all our viewers for asking such great, insightful questions that are sure to help any aspiring design master.
And with that, we're going to round up. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Kat, Angelo, Melissa. Thanks from me, Eric. We will see you all next week. Keep in touch with us. You can find us all online. We'll see you at virtualdesignmaster.io/live next Thursday. And we will be here at 3:00 p.m. Eastern. Of course, you can watch the recordings. And if you go to the YouTube channel, we've got the links right on the site. You can see all the previous Design Master episodes from all of our seasons. And we love the feedback. Thanks, everybody. It's been a super interactive crowd. Lots of chat going on. And we will see you all next week live again.